If it makes you feel better, I was listening to one. We're waiting on a couple of TV cameras, but she'll find the part key. So lay to the press. It's usually the right answer. Lay to the press while we sit here and just wait for a minute. We'll give you 4 minutes and then go ahead and start. Governor.
Sending one more like a Republican.
Except for the ones that are here. We thought the ones that are here.
How's it going? Thanks for coming.
So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Catherine James, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of the Children's Collaborative for Healing and Support. We are here today because we share common interest in supporting children who have experienced the death of a parent or caregiver. Today, we will hear from a number of speakers, and following those speakers, we will have a panel on bereavement. First, we will hear from Heather Nestle. She is the president of the New York Life Foundation and a strong partner in this work. And she will announce her organization's generous donation to the effort. Next, we will have Candlin Winder-Metman, who will speak to us about the death of her husband, leaving behind her daughter. We'll hear about her difficulties coping with this death and the support she found with the Sharing Place. Following Candlin will be Governor Cox. Thank you, sir, for being with us today. And please note that the governor may leave after his remarks to get to another appointment. Next, we will hear from the superintendent of the Granite School District, who is here to discuss his district's role in the effort. And finally, John Bridgeland, co-founder and CEO of the COVID Collaborative, which developed the Children's Collaborative to discuss how Utah will inspire and inform efforts across the nation. And with that, Heather Nestle.
Thank you, Catherine. It's fantastic to be here on such a significant day. Since 2008, to raise awareness about grief for those that we call our forgotten grievers, the children. We know that 1 in 12 children in the United States will lose a parent or a sibling before the age of 18. And there just frankly needs to be a pipeline of support for these children and families to help them navigate the complex journey that's ahead of them. So our mission has evolved over the last dozen years. What started as a focus solely on childhood bereavement has really expanded to encompass support for the entire family, for the school systems and school communities, even for employers, because we understand that grief can't be compartmentalized. It affects every aspect of our lives, and therefore our approach has to be holistic. The $70 million that the New York Life Foundation has invested in this sector has gone to some remarkable organizations across the country, including right here in Salt Lake with the Sharing Place. And through our partnerships with these organizations, we've come to recognize that there is a significant challenge in identifying all children who are eligible and impacted by the death of a parent. They desperately need services, and that's why we're here today. The Children's Collaborative for Healing and Support, which is a groundbreaking endeavor, confronts this challenge head on. Working hand in hand with state entities, with schools and local organizations, we will establish a sustainable and a scalable framework to reach and help all families in need. And we know there are power in numbers, and that is why Utah is such a terrific partner for this pilot. Not only do they have pristine records that we can use, but they're willing and happy to work together across state agencies to link birth records and death records, to link city and state agencies with nonprofits who can do outreach and stay with a family through the process until they receive what they deserve. So our journey begins here in Utah, but our vision extends far beyond this moment. We're looking to create an initiative that can be replicated and sustained, enabling children from all corners of our nation to find the solace and support that they need. In that spirit, I'm thrilled to announce today that the New York Life Foundation is committing a new $1 million grant to this effort starting here in Utah, in addition to the $1.25 million that we've already invested. This really reflects our unwavering dedication to this cause and this effort, and we respectfully request that other funders join us in this work. I want to thank the governor, the Granite School District, and really all the partners that we've met with and that are going to help us put this work forward in Utah, and for joining the Children's Collaborative and the New York Life Foundation as we kick off this initiative that really has the chance to affect millions of families across the country. So let's get started.
My husband, Isaac, and I had long dreamed of traveling the world. And in 2014, I accepted a teaching position that allowed us to move to China with our daughter, Adair. We were excited to be chasing our dreams together, and we boarded that plane with stars in our eyes for each other and the life we were making with our daughter. 6 weeks later, Isaac fell ill and developed serious complications. 5 weeks after that, I left my hysterical daughter behind to ride with him to the local emergency room. He was admitted to the ICU the next day, where he spent 5 days undergoing tests and treatments. I brought Adair to visit a few minutes at a time, but the sight of her daddy covered in tubes and wires was terrifying for her. 6 weeks after he started feeling sick, he died. We were 28 years old. Adair had just turned 2. We were about to celebrate our 8th wedding anniversary. Our story sounds particularly dramatic because of where Isaac got sick and how our situation played out. But in the 8 years since he died, I've heard stories from countless grieving families, and every single one of them is equally devastating. There is no comparison of grief. Every loss of a caregiver is heartbreaking, devastating, and life-changing. The details change, but our story is not unique. After Isaac died, we felt some of the consequences immediately. Adair would not let me out of her sight, and she couldn't be out of my arms for more than a minute or two without crying for me. We both lost our appetites and struggled to eat. My brain was foggy. Every decision was overwhelming and impossible to navigate. I never knew grief could be so physical. My body ached, my head pounded, my stomach churned. Adair didn't have enough language to tell me what she was experiencing, but I could tell it was something similar. I was trying to take care of my baby through her most tragic loss, but I was doing it during the most devastating experience of my life. I had no idea what I was doing, and I could only rely on my instincts to get through each day. More consequences of my husband's death became apparent as time went on. First, I needed to quit my job and move home because I knew we wouldn't survive 6,000 miles away from our family. That meant I needed housing in Utah, but I also didn't have any income. I thought about looking for a new position right away, but I'm a teacher. And in the first months of my grief, I was physically and mentally incapable of doing my job. More to the point, my daughter still suffered from immense separation anxiety, and I couldn't leave her for 9 hours a day. Within a few weeks of Isaac's death, I could leave her for a few hours at a time, but only with very specific family members. While I was away, she would sit at the window, watching for my return. A year after Isaac's death, I enrolled her in preschool, but had to pull her out after 2 weeks because she was crying through the entire school day. She didn't sleep alone for 2.5 years. Isaac and I had owned and rented out a townhouse for several years before he died, but when the mortgage company found out, they threatened to revoke the loan if I didn't qualify on my own. I was permanently locked out of his email account, therefore all of our passwords. I spent months trying to convince various companies to talk to me about all of the accounts he managed. We had no health insurance. We had very little money to pay for things like therapy. The cost of his final illness loomed over us for months. In the weeks and months and even years following Isaac's death, we often looked fine. I heard comments all the time about how well I was doing, how happy Adair looked. Everyone was so glad that we were moving on and doing okay. Most people had no idea of the strain and turmoil that we continued to experience. They didn't know that my daughter was playing funeral with her dolls every day. They didn't know that I was sobbing every time I took a shower, or that my brain spun so fast I couldn't sleep at night. Every decision, no matter how small, felt overwhelming and impossible without my husband to talk to. The daily tasks of raising my child were constant reminders that Isaac should have been there, taking care of us, and he wasn't. As time went on, I remarried to a wonderful man who raises Adair as his own daughter. His own father died when he was 16, and he's taught me a lot about navigating grief. Together, we have rebuilt a beautiful life that includes many memories of my Isaac. But we continue to feel the impact of his death, even 8 years later. Some repercussions are predictable. Each autumn, as the weather turns, our bodies remember the trauma and grief Adair and I lived through in the fall of 2014. Our anxiety runs high, our tempers are short, and we burst into tears for no apparent reason. It's harder for Adair to get up and go to school. Homework feels impossible. My patience evaporates. The pressure of grief slowly increases until we reach the anniversary of Isaac's death. We've lived through what we call grief season 8 times, and I'm still a little surprised every year by how powerful the experience is. Some repercussions are less predictable. The experts tell us that a grieving child has to process their loss over and over again as they enter each developmental stage, and usually in different ways. Parenting a grieving child requires a fair amount of detective work. We often ask ourselves if this behavior is normal child development or a new manifestation of her grief. Usually, she doesn't know. We work together to unpack her thoughts and feelings and help her express and understand herself. Over the years, we've seen grief come in waves. Adair wanted me to say, it hits like a tidal wave. Sometimes she's hungry for details about her daddy, laughing with delight over funny stories. Other times, those stories are devastating, and she needs us to keep them to ourselves for a while. The work of our grief will continue for years to come. Adair and I have been extremely fortunate in our grief journey. We were and are surrounded by loving, supportive friends and family who made sure that all of our needs were taken care of and many of our wants. I was able to live with my parents until I was ready to be on my own again. I was able to find a therapist who didn't charge me. I found connection first in a local widows group, and later at the sharing place, where people helped me understand what we were experiencing and how to navigate it. We still have wonderful therapists who help us move forward in our new reality. My second husband, Jason, is our guide through the milestones of long-term grief. I had all the help and love you could ever ask for. But I've never felt so alone in my life as I did after Isaac died. I've never felt so lost or powerless. I can only begin to imagine how difficult it would be to navigate loss without that support system. But that's the reality countless Americans face following the death of a child's caregiver. Parents face financial instability without a safety net. Adults are too lost in their own grief to think clearly about how to parent their grieving children. Adults usually don't really understand how grief impacts development, mental health, or the ability to learn. These children struggle to express feelings they can't understand. Children might disconnect from friends, stop caring about school, or lash out in anger. The death of a child's caregiver is a loss that ripples through every part of their life. Every grieving child deserves to have what my daughter had: long-term financial stability, community support, and professionals who understand them. They deserve to have loved ones with the time and resources to show up. They deserve a safe place to land. They deserve a chance to rebuild a beautiful life after their loss.
Thank you, Candlin, for sharing that very powerful story. You have an amazing family, and we appreciate your vulnerability and your willingness to share that story with us. Ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to be here with you today. Candlin's story is just one of many examples of why this work matters so much. And thank you, Heather, and the New York Life Foundation and your team who are here with us today for your many years of commitment to supporting grieving children and families, and your confidence in Utah's ability to model better approaches to support children and families who have experienced the tragedy of loss. Now, the Utah Children's Collaborative uses data to identify Utah kids who are grieving and then connects them with existing resources. This may sound a little bit dry, and spreadsheets are rarely exciting, but the point is to help families like Candelen's. These are real people in our communities who are struggling with some of the worst stuff that life can throw at any of us. In Utah, 1 in 15 kids will lose a parent or caregiver before turning 18 years old. Let me repeat that statistic one more time. 1 in 15 kids will lose a parent or caregiver before turning 18 years old. We can't let these families suffer alone. We have the resources already available, and we need to use them. Not only do children suffer the emotional pain of losing a caregiver, they often experience trauma, and when not provided support, they have long-term consequences like low self-esteem, depression, and poor performance in school. We talk a lot in this state about being trauma-informed. We talk about adverse childhood experiences, and the loss of a caregiver is at the very top of those ACEs. Losing a parent can also mean sudden financial and housing insecurity, and some sadly end up homeless, which of course adds more stress and worry to a young person who is already struggling as they're going through development. We're here because the Children's Collaborative recognizes the unique qualities in Utah that makes us the right place to pilot this program. We have caring people leading organizations to help one another, and we care about using data and information to make the right choices. But perhaps most important of all, we step up for our neighbors to support the whole of our communities, especially the most vulnerable. That is what the Utah Children's Collaborative is all about. Now, there are so many people that we need to thank today. Many of you that I can see here. Of course, the Gardner Policy Institute, thank you so much for hosting us today in this wonderful space. I want to thank the United Way of Salt Lake City, and Bill, thank you for your work. Granite School District, the superintendent who is here with us, and you'll get an opportunity to hear from him. The Sharing Place, as has already been mentioned. We have members of the Utah PTA who are here with us. Thank you for joining us. The Utah Foundation who is here, and the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Salt Lake. Thank you for your work as well. I also want to thank former Mayor and Congressman Ben McAdams for helping to bring us together. I have to say what I've actually heard several people say this today, and I just want to reiterate this as I started to learn more about the collaborative and the work that is happening in Utah. And the thing I've heard most is, why weren't we already doing this? I assumed we were already doing this. I assumed that this was being done everywhere. Turns out it's not being done anywhere. And Utah is a unique place. We hear it all the time because of our willingness to collaborate, our willingness to work together, and again our culture of giving back, our culture of volunteerism, our culture of caring. And so this is the right place to do the things that are no-brainers, the things that we all should have been doing anyway, and that is just helping these families and especially these kids connect with these resources that are available. So I'm very excited. I'm very hopeful. I believe that we can do this here in Utah, and then we can get 49 other states to follow our lead. I know that's your plan. It is now my plan, and it is our plan, our collective plan. And we appreciate your willingness to help us out in accomplishing this. Thank you for being here. Again, my apologies that I do have to exit. I hope you won't hold that against me, but let me assure you that you have my commitment as well as commitment of my entire team to help make this happen. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin.
Good afternoon. Rich Nye, Superintendent of the Granite School District, and what an honor and a privilege it is to be with you here this afternoon. Now, as a career educator, with a last name like Nye, when you go into education, you have but one option of what you get to teach. And so it was. I was a science teacher. But as a science teacher, being one of those core subjects, it's state tested. subject. And many, many, many years ago, as I had laid out for the students what was the standardized test in front of them, I had a student who had buried his head in his hands. And I just observed him for a moment. And pretty soon saw tears coming through those hands and down his cheeks. And so I went and I knelt down by his desk. And I asked him what was the matter. He said, "Hey, Mr. Knight, can you step out for a minute?" Absolutely. So we went into the hall and he said, "Mr. Knight, I just lost my dad." And before he died, he told me that he should do all he could to get a good education. And he wanted to do his very, very best on that test to make his dad proud. Now, he is a phenomenal student. And we connected him to counselors and resources to make sure that he got that best education he possibly could get. But he had a long road to haul with the loss of his father figure, his dad, his hero. And so as I consider what it is that sometimes, oftentimes, affect many of our children, those challenges have an immediate impact on how well they perform in school and the type of education that they receive. And so while under our watch, what an opportunity it is to make sure that when children face certain challenges, that they get the education they deserve and the education that we as a society need them to have. And so as I think about partnerships, they are a critical key to unlocking the full potential of our communities, because it's partnerships like these that reach down within the community at the individual level. And schools are uniquely positioned, given our role as hubs in the community of connecting children and their families to these resources. And so it is with a very grateful heart of this superintendent that I appreciate partnerships like these that will, in a very real way, meet the needs of our students so they can be successful, so they can have the life, the dream that, albeit a parent that has been deceased, would still want for them. And it can become that reality through these partnerships. Thank you.
That we could all have a superintendent like Dr. Nye. How accessible you are to every student, including that boy who lost his father. I'm so thrilled to be here. I've been here for 2 days and I want to move to Salt Lake City. It's such a warm and incredibly loving community, people working across politics, sectors, backgrounds, beliefs, faiths, everything. So thank you. And the proof's in the pudding. After 9/11, President Bush wanted to measure volunteering in the United States, and I told him that there was no measure. So we put in place volunteering in the United States, an annual survey that would look at how Americans were responding to this horrific act called 9/11. And year after year, the state of Utah was first in the nation. I just checked again for the latest data last year. And of course, there you are once again with the vast majority of your people serving neighbor and nation. It's no surprise to us then that as we thought at the COVID Collaborative, where could with New York Life Foundation and all these incredible partners, we could launch an initiative coming out of a COVID pandemic that took more than 1.1 million American lives. And then we discovered 340,000 children lost a parent or a caregiver just due to COVID. And an organization that could identify these children, connect them to the supports they need, and really support a system that would help children regardless of the loss. And so this is an urgent state and national challenge. We know, as Governor Cox mentioned, that children have the least capacity to understand and cope with parental loss. And studies tell us that such loss increases the risk of anxiety, depression, substance abuse, high school dropout, unemployment, and more. But this does not have to be the story of these children, and we can take their side. And the Utah Children's Collaborative is the first in the nation to do so. So I'm just so incredibly grateful. I want to give special thanks first, actually, to Candlin Winder Mediman's daughter, who has this wonderful Play-Doh in the front row you can't see that says, "Go Mom," and supporting her every step of the way. And Candlin's husband, who's here, and Candlin for the courage you took in sharing that extraordinary story. To Governor Cox, I live in a place called Washington, D.C., where people don't get along all that well together, and his leadership to help children and families and education, workforce development, affordable housing, mental health, suicide prevention, opportunity for all, and working on a dignity index to create a culture of civility is just so inspiring. And the nation is so lucky to have him as the incoming chair of the National Governors Association. To the leaders of the Gardner Policy Institute and the Hatch Foundation, which supports it, United Way of Great Salt Lake, Unite Us, the Utah Foundation, Boys and Girls Clubs. We had a wonderful visit yesterday. And an incredible visit this morning at the Sharing Place with parents who had lost a loved one, and all they're doing to surround them with support. I also, when I was up on Capitol Hill, my favorite member of Congress, before I knew when we would be here, was Ben McAdams. And we'd go up on Capitol Hill, and he was working with Republicans and Democrats and independents to move the nation's work. And I'm just so grateful that we have the ability to partner with Congressman and Mayor Ben McAdams on this initiative. And to Heather Nestle and Maria Collins, our incredible leaders at the New York Life Foundation, who've done so much to address child bereavement over so many years, create grief-sensitive schools, and support this initiative. My own journey on this issue actually began in Africa, when we were working on the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief and the President's Malaria Initiative, and we saw these children all across Africa who were orphaned. And in the context of our work on the COVID collaborative, we saw that all these children were losing parents and caregivers. And so in December 2021, we issued a report called Hidden Pain: Children Who Lost a Parent or Caregiver to COVID-19 and What the Nation Can Do to Help Them. The report showcased both the staggering loss to children and families, disproportionately young, disproportionately in poverty, disproportionately communities of color, but also highlighted extraordinary evidence supporting grief camps and counseling and programs that could help take their side, and the many financial supports offered at the federal, state, and local levels to help them on their journey. So today's partnership in Utah addresses the biggest challenge we face in helping these children, which is just identifying them and then connecting them at their families choosing to provide support they may need, from funeral cost reimbursements and Social Security survivor and death benefits to grief camps, counseling, and mentoring programs. But as we're reminded again and again, just a peer or an offer of love or support goes such a long way in time of need. So the good people of Utah always step up in times of crisis, and this collaborative is the first in the country on this challenge. So we will innovate together, learn lessons together, in the process help literally thousands of children and families across the United States. So let's also ensure that as goes Utah, so goes the nation. And let's set a high bar for success in Utah and rally all 49 other states, and by the way, the territories and tribal lands, to help the millions of children affected by the loss of the most important people in their lives, their parents, and support them in their journey to a productive and thriving future. So with that, it's now my pleasure to introduce enthusiastically and to thank the leader of this initiative, the CEO of the Children's Collaborative, Catherine Janes, who is going to lead a panel. Catherine.
So thank you. Before the panel, thank you to all the speakers. We are very grateful, and Candlin, thank you for your being here and your story, and know that we're here to support you and your sweet daughter. We're going to take a short break, and then we will reset for the panel. And so we will be back in about 10 minutes. Thank you all. Anybody else? Thank you all. I'm going to get started and just restate some of the statistics to kind of level set us again. Nationwide, 1 in 14 children, more than 5 million children will lose a parent to death before turning 18. In 2021 alone in the United States, more than 1,000 children every day, totaling more than 400,000 children in that year alone, lost a parent and experienced this devastating loss. And as we heard from Mr. Bridgeland, as of December 2022, 340,000 children in the United States have lost a parent or caregiver to just COVID. And so we know this crisis will continue. 1,000 individuals are dying every week to COVID. These children will continue to grieve, and we need to continue to support them. And so first to Maria, sharing more about what New York Life does, some of the programming, and especially the great work that you've done to address bereavement in this country, and what you all have learned from the research you've done on the impact of that loss.
Well, thank you. I'm Maria Collins. I'm the Vice President of the New York Life Foundation. I'm thrilled to be here. Truly, this has been work that we are committed to. In 2008, New York Life really identified this as an issue that's not being served. One, we didn't know what the prevalence was. So starting with initiatives like, first we had to find out how many children are actually impacted. Because when we first started, I heard 1 in 20, 1 in 9, 1 in 14, and it wasn't consistent. And from a funder's aspect, without data, you really can't get funding. And that was a hardship, because if you can't fund programs for children, then you're not doing service, right? So we committed ourselves to doing direct service, and that was our first endeavor. After that, we started doing surveys. So in 2012, we did a survey with the American Federation of Teachers and the National Center for School Crisis and Bereavement. One, because we want to go where children are. That's schools, right? So we wanted to make sure that teachers felt supported and they had the tools to really engage their students, bereaved students. And what we found was 92% of them said they needed more support and grief deserved more attention. However, only 3% of districts offered bereavement training, and 7% of educators attended bereavement training. That was 2012. So taking that information, similar to this project, we started a coalition to support grieving students. And it officially launched in 2013. So a year later, we had the data, we knew who we had to get involved, and we got them at the table. And the great thing is that, similar to Utah, everyone was on board, and we still meet today. We're celebrating 10 years, the Coalition to Support Grieving Students. And really what we did was create resources and access to educators to support grieving students. And then we knew we needed to do something else. Just building something like we build the Children's Collaborative is not enough, right? You have to take action. So we asked our workforce to be trained as ambassadors to personally introduce this initiative and the resources to every school community in the country. That's a lofty goal. And it's still my goal. And they have. So we launched that officially in 2018. And unfortunately, COVID, because schools were shut down, we were limited in what we could do. We had a break for about a year and a half, but we're back to pre-pandemic levels of providing support. So we also surveyed educators again in 2020 to see, one, is this still a need? And are we making a difference? And we saw that we were. We can't take full credit. The interest in supporting bereaved children did not change. It actually went 1% higher, went to 93%. However, to our surprise, 12% of districts are now offering bereavement training that educators stated, and 15% of educators receive bereavement training. 3 to 15 is a great increase. So that's just one of the ways that New York Life has really addressed childhood bereavement. But we do much more. You know, the research is really important, data-informed information on not only the need, the prevalence, because with the prevalence in 2018 as well, we worked with Judy's House to come up with the children's bereavement estimation model. Took several years, but we got there. And in 2018, we found out that 1 in 15 children in the United States will lose a parent or a sibling due to death before 18. Today, I know Catherine gave you 1 in 14, but if you include siblings, it's 1 in 12. I do want to repeat that. 1 in 12 children will lose a parent or a sibling by death. So we knew the prevalence, and that takes us to today. Who are these children? Unless the parent, you know, and you heard a beautiful story this afternoon, it takes a lot to think about all the resources without having the supportive cast, without understanding the systems. How are you reaching these children? So we think this collaborative can really bring together, one, the resources that New York Life has invested in, and the partners that we care about, like the National PTA, like the Sharing Place, like the Boys and Girls Club, like school districts. And hopefully we can identify them to create that pipeline of support. And beyond just bereavement support, it is the financial.
Thank you. Bill, the United Way does so much for Salt Lake. How does bereavement fit into your work?
Well, our core work is about helping people meet their basic needs and then helping kids achieve their potential. And bereavement fits into both of those things, or this initiative fits into both of those things. 211 Utah is a service that 211 is a service that's available nationwide. Here in Utah, 211 connects people to literally 10,000 different services statewide. And imagine life without that. Imagine being in crisis, being a family who's just lost a provider, a caregiver, and needing to know, where do I go for services about bereavement, or where do I go for services about housing or food or any of the economic challenges or broader healthcare challenges. It's chaos unless there's an infrastructure to help people find what they need. And that's what 211 does. It does it through electronic means, but it also does it through the phone conversations and interactions with trained, caring people who can help, like, dig a little deeper. And maybe somebody's calling about the immediate crisis of an eviction notice, but the reason that's happening is they've just lost a caregiver. Like 211 can uncover that and then help people get connected. And that work, coupled with the work that we do with Granite School District and other school districts in the state to build coordinated, structured infrastructure to help every kid achieve their potential from birth to career, that's where the alignment with the Children's Collaborative in this initiative really can take advantage of both kinds of partnership and can really systematically and proactively find kids, connect them, follow up with them, support them, and then stick with that the whole child until that child graduates from high school and post-secondary education.
That's great. Jill, as you think about the Sharing Place, you work directly with families. Can you tell us a little bit about the challenges that you see these families facing upon the death of a parent, spouse, sibling?
Yeah. So at the Sharing Place, we provide peer-to-peer grief support groups. And so kids are matched up with kids their same age in similar circumstances. And then while the kids are in group doing their important work, the parents have a group as well. And so we as Candlin was saying earlier, support was so essential to her to feel like they weren't alone. So our goal at the Sharing Place is really to help people realize that they're not alone. When you're, a 5th grade kid and the entire neighborhood's talking about what happened at your house last night, and you feel so alone and isolated and different, it's really hard for kids to understand that. And so when we put them together, they really work. It's such beautiful work. I can't credit the Sharing Place for the work. The kids are the ones that do the work, but they do such a great job in supporting each other. And I think the biggest challenge is finding those other families. There's no other place to sit down with another mom and say, hey, is this a teenage thing or is this grief thing? What worked for your grieving teenager? How do we connect those families together?
Yeah, no, that's great. And this initiative is focused on that exact key challenge, identifying families who have lost a parent or caregiver. Maria and I feel like we were in the trenches during COVID. But can you talk about what we learned about identification and what was the aha moment for you and for New York Life to really suggest that we launch into this work?
The aha moment was, I think we were talking to a school district and we found out that a tremendous amount of children lost their parents by death. And unfortunately, we knew the number. Again, we knew the number, but a number is just a number without a face, right? Like we needed to get in touch with those families to ensure that they were okay. And I think that says, okay, so how do we track this? Can we do it through schools? Can we do it through death records? Can we do it through, we were thinking of so many different things. And I said, well, the easiest thing, you want a trusted source, right? We're not coming to Utah as the experts. We're coming here to partner because everyone in this room, the community are the trusted sources. When I honestly look at the PTA like parent to parent, right? They're the ones that really can speak to the parent, to understand their needs, to connect. They're part of a community. We're just trying to build that community with additional resources. And it is about that identification. Because there's a couple of things that we all have to think about. And I think Jill, you put it perfectly. That child, when we first started, we said our purpose is that no child should grieve alone, right? And you think about that classroom, there might only be that year, that moment in time, one child. Potentially there could be more, but he or she might think, I'm the only person. And the parent is so busy day to day, so you have to give them an opportunity to present something by someone that they know, saying, you know what, there is a resource. And that was the aha moment. It had to be built into a system that is seamless and stress-free for that parent. You can't make it so difficult and so complicated that the parent is worried about, as you heard, taking care of your child, not being able to think about anything else, not being able to go back to work. So how do you make that? In the checkbox, you fill out those forms every year as a parent, right? So we said, schools. Let's go through schools. That's an easy, fast way for us to identify. And that was really the aha moment because we knew the numbers, but we didn't know the children.
That's right. That's right. And Bill, you've spoken about the great work you've done connecting families and 211 in particular. How do you see 211 expanding to include bereavement and grief resources?
Well, 211 Utah does include bereavement and grief resources now, but not nearly enough.
Right.
And so our first step is we're going to beef up our database. We're going to talk to Jill and others, and we're going to learn what are all of the things that are out there that just need to be available. So if someone's on their phone or they go on the web and they go to 211utah.org, they'll find more than we have now. That's the first thing. The second thing is when people call us, we'll have the ability, by being part of this coalition and learning with everybody, we'll have the ability to ask the right questions, to help direct people more efficiently to the right resources. We'll have the ability, I was talking to Jill a second ago, who have the ability in real time to follow up with people and find out, did you get the service you were looking for? And if you didn't, we'll have the data to lift that up to the governor and to the legislature and to others very quickly to talk about how under-resourced many things are, not only grief resources, but financial stability resources, access to healthcare and housing, for example. So 211 is, we're excited to be part of this collaborative and to fold this need into the other needs, because there aren't, I think it's rare that individuals and families just have one need, and 211 has a comprehensive view into the landscape of resources available, and we can help people find them.
That's great. And Jill, for you, what types of support and resources do you see that families need right after the loss?
I think those first initial days, families in particular with children need help with the language of how to tell their children. How do you have that conversation with your child of what just happened to your family? How do you help your child understand that? Kids developmentally have these big, huge imaginations, and they internalize everything. And so how do we effectively tell our kids what happened so that they don't assume that guilt or create a story in their own head? So I think in those first initial days is really helping families understand, how do we tell our kids? How do we support them through this next week? As time goes on, Candlin talked about it in her speech as well, but kids go through this process that we call re-grieving. And when they hit that next developmental level, they're going to re-grieve that death over and over again, because they can understand that death in deeper and more complex ways as they get older. So I love that Candlin says that it's been 8 years and it still hurts just as much, because grief is a lifelong process. And typically people are saying, it's been a year. You're doing better now, right? It's been a year. And so expanding those services for a long time for families is so important. They need that support 5-10 years later.
No, that's great. And as part of this initiative, you all heard, we'll be working with Granite School District. Bill, can you tell us a little bit more about Granite School District and why they're such a perfect fit for us?
Well, if you were here earlier, you saw it for yourself. But it's not really just about one person. United Way of Salt Lake started to work in these deep partnerships with schools and school districts about, 15 years ago. And we work with many school districts, and they're all awesome. What was true about Granite is that their leadership leaned into the culture of partnership early. They welcomed the idea of after-school programs in their schools and United Way staff asking them questions about how we could be helpful. And, teachers are by default overwhelmed. So you can come with lots of help, but it's hard to take in help if you're just trying to survive the crisis and the challenge of the day. What I'm about to say is true in school districts all over Utah, but Granite's partnership forward, the yes that they start with. We say yes they have yes in their hearts. And when this came up, this was true too. Like, I think we could have taken this to other school districts that we partner with. But there's a unique concentration of leaders like Dr. Nye and principals and community partners who have been building trust in this promised partnership that's been in existence for about a decade. And it's just the logical place to direct focused effort, prove that it can work, and then expand it to other places.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I know, Maria, New York Life Foundation has made the offer to train all of Granite School District through its Grief Sensitive Schools initiative. Can you tell us what that actually looks like on the ground?
Oh, absolutely. So I want to start with this. We're not training them to be grief counselors, right? So I want everyone to be very clear about that. What we go in is basic information that's a tier 1 support. Everyone in the school building should have basic knowledge about grief support, where to refer to, what potentially you may say to a child if they are grieving or if they've experienced a loss or if they go through a transition that triggers an adaptive response or a maladaptive response to their grief. So our program really starts with education, understanding the prevalence, understanding the resources, and potentially next steps. Where do you go? And as I stated, that's the first. Second, higher level of training. So we do work with the National Center for School Crisis and Bereavement, but that's not our only partner. We have several partners that can come in and train. So that is the clinical staff at the school, giving them more details about grief support. What are some of the best practices? Also self-care for the staff. I mean, we all live in a society that through our lives, we don't talk about death. We don't even use the word death. I joked prior, it's like I say it more than probably our insurance agents because it's concrete language. And that's needed. And that's something I learned. I am a social worker and I went to social work school, and it was only like one lesson out of my 2 years of social work school in getting a master's. But so that's what the Grief Sensitive Schools is really about. 1, education, 2, understanding the prevalence, and 3, where are the resources? And we are creating a more robust to add that financial piece to ensure that the financial benefits are also communicated, through our Grief Sensitive Schools, so people know it's comprehensive.
Catherine, can I add?
Sure.
The other thing that we don't talk about, or we don't do sometimes, is ask for help. We live in a culture where, like, a crisis of any kind just exacerbates loneliness, and we don't always ask for help, and we don't know the way to do that. So imagine a world in which proactively the adults in a kid's life are reaching out to the parents in that kid's life and offering help. Like, that's game changing. If you don't have to feel alone, if you don't have to make it through one more day of wondering what you're going to do, and somebody calls you and says, hey, do you need some help? That changes everything.
Yeah, no, well said. And Jill, you hear from parents directly. What do you hear is the role of the school and teachers when thinking about grief and sending their kids after a loss?
Well, kids spend the bulk of their day in the school, right? And we know that adults can change, just one caring adult can change the course of a life for kids. We know that. And if they're spending 6 hours a day with one adult that understands that grief is normal and natural, it's okay for them to have their big feelings. And through the Grief Sensitive Schools Act has a grief room in their school. One of the elementary schools that I know has a grief room for these kids who are having a moment. They can go and take a minute and calm down and gather their big feelings. But that's transformative for a child's grief journey, that they're able to say, hey, when that tidal wave hits that they were talking about, I have a place to go. I know who I can say it to. I'm not going to make you uncomfortable when I say, hey, I'm really missing my dad today. And that's hard to talk about. Like you guys have been saying, it's hard to talk about death and dying, and nobody talks about it. And people are scared to bring up your dead person because it might be salt in the wounds, but we need to talk about it, and we need to let kids and families know that it's okay to talk about their person. So the schools is a perfect place for them to get that safety and understand it's okay for me to talk about my person. It's okay for me to have these feelings about my person.
And I want to add, like, one of the things that also you asked me, like, what I've learned and what, the foundation has really, I would say, really gone deep on is the things that I've learned from the actual children I talk to. Because although I'm the grant maker and with the foundation, I actually attend a lot of programs myself, and I'm a very involved person, and just meeting the young people that experience the death of their person or the caregiver that's left has really taught me about, one, they want to be seen. Because, Heather mentioned the forgotten griever. They are. Because we think about funerals. I mean, a lot of times they're not part, or they're not engaged in the funeral, or they're not present potentially, or they're not in that discussion about what it is, right? So they want to be seen. Like, you know what? You lost someone, I lost someone too. And so it is something that we have to acknowledge. Being heard, right? So language is so important, but we want to give them the open space for them to talk, not for us to tell them, right? So giving them that space and then to be recognized. Not that you have to make a special, I don't even know, like a special assignment for them, but just being recognized that maybe today, because it's Mother's Day or it's Father's Day or it's the anniversary or the birthday of my loved one, I might not be my usual self, right? But recognizing that I'm going to be growing through my grief. And that's something that, we have to think about. It's like there are ebbs and flows. There's no linear part of grief. Some days are good days, and actually some moments are good moments. So it's really being seen by, being heard, and being recognized. And I think that is where the support, because, most children that lose a parent or a sibling with support will be fine. It's without support, not just emotional support, but financial support, because we're seeing that. The equalizer are the emotional supports that are in place and the financial. So there are research studies that show without Social Security and survivor benefits, they're at a larger risk for poverty. But Social Security can equalize that. So those are things that we think about and we've learned.
That's great. And
Can I add one thing to that?
Sure.
I just would like to point out that people say to me all the time, I don't know what to say to families. I don't know how to do this. I'm not an expert in this. And so then people tend to say nothing. And so it does not take a fancy degree or letters behind your name to support someone in their grief. Every single person is capable of walking beside a grieving family. So I just think it's so important to recognize when we're talking about teachers that they may not be grief counselors. They're not experts. They don't know. But it doesn't take much to be able to walk beside somebody.
no, we agree. We've covered a lot today. I want to let you all have any final remarks before I open it up for questions from the audience. Maria?
Well, I just thank Utah for allowing us to be here, for being open, and yes, in your hearts, right? Yes, in your hearts, for really, it is about that one child. Because I think, when we think about bereavement or childhood bereavement, people think about the larger scale, right? Losses, deaths. Yes, those, bring us together. But what about that one child that no one else knows? That's who we're trying to help. That's who we're trying to connect with.
I think I'd return the thanks to New York Life, using the governor's observation earlier that this kind of seems like we all nationwide should have thought of this a long time ago. Well, New York Life has been thinking about it for a long time, and I'm really grateful that they came to catalyze this effort, this collective shared effort to address this challenge.
I just am thrilled that we're talking about children's bereavement issues. Not one of us in this room is immune from death and dying bereavement at some point in our lives, and I am just thrilled that we're talking about it, and hopefully that opens more doors and more support for these kids.
That's right. Audience, any questions? Comments? No?
I'll have a question. I talked to Bill about this on Meeting for Chill, but one of the things is I've been working on this issue that is surprising to me is how it's almost emotional support for children, financial support for children, and they are separate silos that don't seem to talk to each other. Right? And is that your observation too? And what do you do
Yeah.
those systems talk?
That's such a great question, and I don't really know that I know the answer to it because we just have never had a model for it before. I think there's a lot of things that we need to try and connect and realize that they go hand in hand. We can't emotionally support a hungry child, right? We have to meet basic needs first because we all know that when we're hungry, we're tired and we're angry and we can't talk about it. So we need to meet those basic needs first so that we can appropriately emotionally support them. So those two things go hand in hand, and I'm not quite sure how it becomes these two totally separate issues. But it's something we need to fix.
Actually, I'm gonna chime in. You just gave me a new idea, which I've never had a loss for. So there's a wonderful organization called the Alliance, the National Alliance for Children's Grief, and they have their annual symposium. We will be attending in a couple of weeks, and New York Life brings all of our partners together and I'm gonna challenge our partners because it's about education. Like what I'm hearing also from parents is like, I just didn't know. I mean, CBS did a story on this, and less than 60% of all children receive survivor benefits, and they're entitled to them. It's about education. It's about just helping them through the process. So again, it is a lift for these organizations that do wonderful work, but it is something that probably if we can create some easy basic information, which New York Life is willing to put the skin in the game to do, is to saying, can you add that to your services that you provide these families?
I'm going to add it. I promise you, Ben was not looking for me to say this. But the solution to the problem, which is a problem, every time we try to solve a problem in society, we start something new and we don't ask ourselves, is there something else already, some other infrastructure where if we rest this new thing, we might get the benefits of tackling the grief challenge and the economic challenge at the same time. And Ben didn't do that. When New York Life and Ben McAdams were talking, I imagine I wasn't there, but when you said like, where can we do this? Well, maybe we should do it in Utah. And when you said, how should we do it? The instinct wasn't, let's start something in complete siloed fashion. The instinct was, let's work with people who are already working on something that might fit. And that's the solution, I think, to the problem.
Ben McAdams Fan Club. Yes.
Put yourself 5-10 years from now. How will we know we're successful?
So data is the one thing that will tell the world we're successful. And there will be some measures, KPIs that we will be measuring clearly. But I think also, it's our partners that will report back and feel comfortable in providing those resources and knowing children are receiving. And New York Life will continue to survey, education, personnel, parents, and others to understand what their needs are, So I think, it's measurement, but it's also personal connections. And as Heather stated, we are one of the largest corporate funders, and I don't use funder. I don't like to use funder because we're really a partner. So it's really connecting with our partners, just making sure that they have systematic change. So success is doing it right in Utah, seeing the data, and then asking every other state to join Utah.
Well, I would say for the sharing place, I'm in a totally different ballgame because I'm on the ground floor working with kids. And for the sharing place, the continued expansion of our program, in the last 5 years, we've opened 2 new locations, and we want to keep continuing that work. I know that not every family can come to my Salt Lake City location. And so if we can continue to expand our programming and replicate that in other cities and reach more kids, that shows success to me.
I'll just give one example of maybe a measure. Like in some communities in Utah, 100% of kids who have lost a parent or caregiver will have immediately been contacted, access the services that are available to them, and will show dramatic improvements in their journey.
Right, because it is about, we can definitely, that's the KPI that we will be looking at, is that once the kid is identified, the parents opt in to receive services, and us walking them through, let's say, survivor benefits, that they actually receive those benefits. That will be a huge KPI for us.
Yes.
Amanda with Boys and Girls Clubs, I just want to again extend my thank you and gratitude for the work that you do, especially to New York Life. I know you guys really do show up as partners, and that we have benefited, and we personally from the tools and resources that you have made available over the past several decades. So the Be There toolkit, I have used that, I've pulled that up, used the resiliency, used the parents' resources, have talked to the staff, have talked to students in times of crisis. So thank you you are building a foundation of resources that in school and out of school training professionals can use and really create space. And I really appreciated the comment of we're not trying to train grief counselors, right? I'm not in the business of providing that as an expertise, but I am in the space where we're providing spaces where children naturally are. And to be able to go, we need to be aware of those before that. And how do we become grief sensitive? How do our staff know the right words to say and the things not to say, or the things to give the space for the youth, and then to connect to other resources? Because I think that collaboration in 211 and schools and things is where it is, because we can't be all things to all kids. And so I just appreciate this entire, coming together, and that we are excited to participate and see where it goes as well. So thank you. I think somebody said, I think it might have been Bill or earlier, about the support for the teachers, because they're also, and parents are overwhelmed, teachers are overwhelmed in making this easy. Out of school time professionals also overwhelmed, right? It's like, and this, and this, and do this, and be trauma informed, and do this, making it easy for them to just, that's part of our natural of what we do every day, how we show up for kids. But then that compassion fatigue that we have been seeing in both teachers and caregivers and parents and everything from the last 3 years is high. So what do we see in the resources and support for those who support kids who experience grief, or for those who support kids who experience trauma, and how can we build out our team of people so that we are prepared to show up with our own resiliency that we want to see in the kids?
Self-care is super important. That's one of the things that's part of the Grief Sensitive Schools Initiative, is that one, we recognize that without self-care for the supporting cast, and I call it the supporting cast because all of us can play a part. And I think if we don't recognize that a professional development day or something where we're actually just working on that, how do we support ourselves through this? What is our support system in that environment, in our work environment, but our home environment, similar to what we want our families to have as well. So I think that will be definitely part of what we do here in Utah and what we do across. Many of our partners do self-care workshops for professionals, for educators, for out-of-school providers. I think I shared, well, maybe I didn't, but we thought about out-of-school providers. We wanted to start with schools. Our Grief Sensitive Schools Initiative will be expanding to out-of-school providers, so youth-serving organizations. We will be piloting it. We always like to pilot to make sure we're addressing the need and then moving forward. So self-care is part of the modules on grievingstudents.org, which is the coalition resource. So we make sure that that is a top priority.
Anyone else? If not, thank you, panelists. We appreciate you. We appreciate your partnership. We're excited about the future and hope that we see your faces often as we start to figure out what this looks like and implement. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.